Friends, we've talked about how the mission of Young Life is in such great harmony and concert with the mission of the Catholic Church. We've also talked about how that twofold nature of Young Life's mission statement fits in with the twofold nature of Catholic spiritual formation, in particularly focusing on that gospel side, that personal relationship side of Catholic formation. But what about our relational methodology? What about the idea that we really execute our plan through relationships? How does that fit in? Is there any room for that? And so, friends, we're going to go back and look again at our mission statement and that twofold nature. We're going to ask ourselves the question, why do we have a twofold nature in our mission statement? Why is it in Young Life that we're not just satisfied to help kids mature in their faith through discipleship, or we're not just satisfied to do pure evangelism and simply introduce kids to who Jesus Christ is? Why is it that we have to do both? And to be honest with you, it's a great question, because most of us are geared naturally towards one or the other. But this makes us unique as a mission, that we blend them and that we do them together. And it makes us, the work we do, incredibly challenging. So where do we get this idea that we have to both preach Christ and proclaim him, but also help people become disciples? Well, friends, it's not a Young Life idea. It's actually an ancient idea, perhaps even a Catholic one. Now, let's go back both to Jim Rayburn, but then also go back to talk about some writings from St. Augustine from the 5th century. Now, remember what Jim Rayburn said. Jim Rayburn said that he had a big dream, that every kid had the right to know who Christ is, what he's done for him, and what it means for them, that they ought to be able to choose. Now, St. Augustine, writing in the 5th century, said something similar. He said, "This is to preach Christ, to say, in fact, everything that one must believe about Christ, not only whose son he is, from whom he takes his divinity, but also from whom he takes his humanity." And friends, that's our talks, night 1, 2, and 3 at camp. Who is the person of Jesus as it relates to us in humanity? But then Augustine continues. He says, what things Jesus has suffered and why, what his resurrection means to us, and what is the gift of the Spirit which he has promised and given to his believers. And that's our talks on night 4, 5, and 6. And so Augustine, way back in the 5th century, laid out so much of our proclamation message. But then he continues in talking about what does it mean to really preach Christ. He says, to also remember of whom Jesus is the head, what he desires, he forms, he loves and sets free, and leads to eternal life and glory. When all of this is said, whether at times more fully or profusely, or at times more briefly and concisely, then is Christ preached. And still, all in all, nothing is left out, neither that pertains to faith, nor anything pertaining to morals. And so Augustine injects this thing at the end. Did you catch it? He said nothing is left out, especially that pertaining to morals. And that's Young Life's mission statement. We have to not only proclaim Christ, but we have to also teach kids what it means to mature in their faith. Now, where did Augustine get that idea in the 5th century? You may be familiar with his story. He was a rough kid and a tough young man. He grew up in North Africa, and he's a brilliant person with an incredible mind. And he grew up and he was wicked smart, and he was an incredible orator and an actor and a performer. And he traveled up to Alexandria, the big city. And he was a womanizer, and he had a child out of wedlock. And he just sought pleasure with all of his adulthood and all of his skills. But his mother, Monica, was a Christian, and she prayed for him even then. Later, when he chronicles his life in one of the most famous books from antiquity called Confessions, he gives a statement that we use often at Young Life Camp, especially night 3, when he says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in you." That's Augustine. That's come him looking back at his life and finding that all those things he went after to fill his life were meaningless. The great mathematician Blaise Pascal, he picked up on that phrase, and about 1200 years later he said, "There's a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator, made known through Jesus Christ." So if Augustine was such a lost soul, restless and yearning for meaning and purpose in life, how did he become St. Augustine? How did he come to meet Christ? Well, it's another beautiful story. Around the same time, a couple decades earlier, there was a man named Ambrose who was growing up in Rome, and he was sent to Milan because he was a really effective governor and a great politician. And he was in charge of keeping the peace, and Milan was embroiled in a controversy. The controversy was over the teachings of Arius, who later we know as a heretic, and the Orthodox Church, and they were battling out what it meant to really understand the person of Christ. And the problem was the local bishop had died. And so as these different forces are duking it out, there was nobody to go through and, in a sense, keep the peace while they discussed and argued. And so our good friend Ambrose shows up in Milan, and as the governor begins to engage this conversation. Well, in fact, he does it so well, and the Orthodox Christians win the day, that they are so enthusiastic about him that they ask him to be their bishop. And he says, listen, I'm not even a Christian. Now, he's one of the only people you will ever read in history that was baptized, converted, and also became bishop on the same day. So he got to studying, and he developed his preachings and his writings, the very gospel that we preach today. Ambrose was the one who put pen to paper and talked about who Jesus is in his divinity, but also who Jesus is in his humanity and what it was that his life and death meant for us. Ambrose really gave incredible depth to the concept of the atoning sacrifice of Jesus in our life. And wouldn't you know that in 384, a 30-year-old man, a kid named Augustine, met Ambrose while he was up in Milan doing a tour. Ambrose led Augustine to Christ, and he discipled him, and he helped him mature in his faith. And when Augustine returned home back to Africa, his brilliance was recognized, and his sincere conversion struck everybody, and his incredible faith, and so he was appointed the Bishop of Hippo. Quite honestly, until Thomas Aquinas and later Martin Luther, there really were no other theologians outside of Ambrose and Augustine that impacted the Western world or the church more than those two. And it started out as a friendship, as a lost person, a lost young man being taken under the wing of a local bishop, of someone who knew who Jesus was, but who we are as well. Friends, the foundational theological pillars of the church and of the world, two of the incredible, what they call doctors of the church, the gospel moved between them through friendship. And that's what we do too. We pursue young people who don't know anything about Jesus, but they have a restlessness and an emptiness in their heart. And that has always been the way the church has been doing its best work to reach its people too.